Dankeschön. Und ich werde jetzt auf Englisch sprechen, nur weil ich bin daran gewohnt, aber wir können dann die...
I'm going to speak in English because I'm used to it, but afterwards we can continue the discussion in German. Am 18. November
Sein Stefan Heim von Reichensteins Album Amicorum. In a format typical for the genre, Wenzel wrote the year with an inflamed heart, his abbreviated motto, Ich erwarte die Zeit, and 4 short lines written in Constantinople during the Schlaftrunk, or last drink before bed. The folio includes his coat of arms alongside an image of a woman lifting her veil to look at the viewer. Who were Wenzel and his friend Stefan, and what were they doing drinking together in the administrative capital of the Ottoman Empire? How is their interaction relevant for the theme of Germany from outside? These 2 men were part of a dynamic household of Central Europeans residing in Ottoman Constantinople in a building known as the German House, the Deutsches Haus. The structure housed the Habsburg resident ambassador and his large retinue and hosted a steady flow of visitors. Thousands of men passed through its walls in the 16th and 17th centuries. Some stayed for only a few days, months, or years, while others resided in the building for over a decade. Inhabitants varied in social status, linguistic background, regional origins, and legal subjecthood vis-à-vis the Habsburg sovereign they collectively represented. They came from lands now distributed across the modern countries of Austria, Germany, Czech Republic, Slovenia, Hungary, Slovakia, Croatia, Romania, Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, France, and Italy. There, in the center of Constantinople, daily contact with the Ottoman world provided a setting in which these men came to socialize, document their encounters, and ultimately realize their commonality, a sort of wir werden, right? In addition to travel narratives, personal letters, and official reports, the multilingual and religiously diverse inhabitants of the German house left behind over 50 manuscripts filled with decorated papers, signatures, costume images, genre scenes, and city views. Such albums were enigmatic objects that recorded the movements and social ambitions of their owners, while serving as practical guides, personal keepsakes, colorful passports, and very heavy recommendation letters. The images of costume figures are closely related to costume books, which were visual catalogs that portrayed people in poses designed to showcase their sartorial habits, allowing the viewer to read them in the same way one would read a written text. These were often interleaved with decorated papers called Turkish paper or ebru, which came from workshops staffed partly by Persian artisans using techniques developed in Central Asia. These illustrations and decorated papers served as backgrounds for Alba Amicorum, or friendship albums. Stammbücher, maybe some of you know them from your own childhood. Poesiebücher are still very active. My daughter has one in kindergarten today. So these were early modern forms of social media developed at German universities. In these albums, students commemorated their social and intellectual networks by gathering declarations of friendship, brotherhood, or sisterhood, quotations, coats of arms, and images. By the late 16th century, travelers often used such albums to record their networks of mobility. For many inhabitants of the German house, the archival materials that historians traditionally rely on remain silent. Only the deeply personal albums compiled by low-ranking members of the household allow for a more holistic view of the full spectrum of daily life within the German house and the social networks that converged there. And my most important album belongs to the cook. So I have a whole chapter that really focuses on the cook and his social networks. The full spectrum includes men from Habsburg-ruled Holy Roman Empire of the German nation and its contiguous kingdoms, a series of heterogeneous composite entities in which subjecthood, belonging, and identification were all regularly negotiated against competing claims. Traditional scholarship has argued that local power relations and loyalties were determining factors in the region, even in the period before the era of nation-state building. Yet such albums record the activities of hundreds of men from diverse backgrounds serving in ambassadorial retinues, in tribute-carrying delegations, as pilgrims awaiting passports, as students passing through on study tours, or as released captives. Fluid loyalties and complex patronage networks wove back and forth across their varied homelands, which were ruled directly and often indirectly by Habsburg sovereigns. They also wove across territories that might be considered areas of wishful thinking. Wishful thinking, where Habsburg attempts at hegemony clashed with strong resistance from local elites. Albums from the German house are full of entries in Latin and German, alongside Hungarian, Czech, Polish, Italian, South Slavic, Dutch, French, and Spanish. This veritable Habsburg Babylon was a microcosm of late 16th century imperial myths. It embodied the dream, or for many historians, the delusion, of a Habsburg-ruled Central European Christian monarchy under one ruler. The late 16th century was a period of profound transformation in political, cultural, and legal spheres across Central Europe. Several shifts in imperial posturing that attempted to redraw the political map of Europe were tangible from within the German house. The increasing division between Central European and the Spanish branches of the dynasty, the outbreak of the protracted war in the Netherlands against integrative forces, and new concentration on collecting loyalties and lands to the east of the Holy Roman Empire in Bohemia, Hungary, and attempts in Poland, Lithuania. The residents of the German house did not have the benefit of the historian's hindsight. For late 16th century contemporaries, the empire was not just the Holy Roman Empire, but also Habsburg lands writ large, often rendered under the umbrella term German. They did not know which side would win each political contest. As the map of Europe was being redrawn back home, these individuals lived alongside one another in a single household. And I think it's interesting to see that Ortelius's maps here are sold without color, and if you look at every copy, it has different coloring on it, right? So it's very much a subjective exercise when you look at these maps and the coloring of them. Take, for example, the album of Bohemian nobleman Hans Reichard von Steinbach, who served as a member of the tribute-carrying delegation in 1591 and collected dozens of images, hundreds of decorated papers, and 60 signatures during his 3-month stay. Under the leadership of Ambassador Friedrich von Kreckwitz from Glogau in Lower Silesia, which is now in Poland, Hans Reichard and the 70 men he traveled with represented Emperor Rudolf II as they delivered to the Sultan an annual sum of cash and valuables stipulated in the peace treaty. Many of these men signed the album in the German house or on group outings to Galata, to Üsküdar, and to the Black Sea. They came from all corners of Habsburg-ruled territory and included men like Andreas Rinsmaul from Styria, Bartholomeus Petzen from Korowiana in South Tyrol, Achatz Georg Wolfgang von Schaumberg zu Strossendorf in Upper Franconia, Karl Ligsalz zu Aschholding from Bavaria, and David Reitgadler of Seng in Croatia, as well as Johann Bloh of Silesia. These men gathered around tables in the dining hall of the German house and exchanged signatures. The walls surrounding them decorated with painted inscriptions underscoring the importance of unity in diversity under Habsburg sovereigns. This united front of the German house was paradoxically represented during formal processions and proceedings as Hungarian in its outward appearance. During the ritually encoded act of submission embodied in the handover of the tribute payment to the Ottoman Sultan, in which Hans Reichard and his friends participated, Habsburg delegations wore ankle-length red robes fashioned by Hungarian tailors. These tailors had been commissioned by the Aulic War Council to outfit the entire retinue with a dolman and mente combination ever since the 1570s. The reason for this dissimulation was ceremonial. The emperor's tribute payment to the Ottomans was meant to be understood as a payment for his portion of Hungary and not for the Holy Roman Empire itself. And what you see here is a report that's complaining about the French, who have called the house the Hungarian house and not the German house. So this is one of these moments where the we comes in as well. So the Wir-Gefühl is because of a French accusation against the house, which makes them reflect on why they're all together. Such productive ambiguity allowed for the maintenance of official diplomatic peace amid a fundamental disagreement about sovereign legitimacy and claims to imperial titles. Such dressing up and acts of subservience did little to quell the enthusiasm of the hundreds of men who visited the German house. And Hans Reichard von Steinbach's album reveals that young noblemen discussed the journey with one another back home in Central Europe. The entry of another Bohemian nobleman here in Steinbach's album indicates that the two men had discussed life in the German house before Steinbach's departure. Ostrovec had participated in an earlier tribute-carrying delegation himself, and his signature includes an image with three motifs related to the journey: the Pillar of Pompey, which is a monument at the north end of the Bosphorus, which is visited very frequently by members of the house; the Column of Constantine, which stood directly across the street from the house; and this veiled woman in a red overcoat. The image accompanying Wenzel Martin von Wiernitz's signature, which was mentioned at the beginning, is a variation of this type of veiled woman. The accumulation of such moments of exchange, captured and preserved in albums, reveals what Anne Stoler has called states of becoming imperial. In collecting the Ottoman world, the residents of the German house were also collecting themselves. Page by page, entry by entry, album making allowed these men to gather, interact with, process, and reflect on the world they temporarily inhabited and the forces that brought them together under one roof. At stake here is a fundamental question. What exactly was a German, and how did a diverse group negotiate their varying political, social, and religious differences while living abroad? In other words, how did a Styrian, a Bavarian, a Bohemian interact with a Hungarian, a Silesian, and a Prussian under one roof? Pinning down the nature of identification practices within the German house is complicated by the dizzying array of ranks and jurisdictions across Central European territories, all of which converged within its walls. And I should add that in the signatures themselves, this is where we see the use of these terms, always sort of pointing to additional homelands that are nested within this space. The German house and the interactions between its inhabitants reveal how an unusual environment, one that might anachronistically be called extraterritorial, left boundaries and hierarchies remarkably fluid. As households formed and dispersed around the drinking table in the administrative capital of the Ottoman Empire, they collectively represented an emerging sense of political and social loyalty to Habsburg sovereigns. Another album from the German house, owned by Veit Pelshofer, an Austrian nobleman in the tribute-carrying delegation of 1583, includes an illustrated poem commemorating or commenting on the diversity and fragility of the empire he served. The double-headed imperial eagle stands at the center with the arms of Bohemia on its breast. It is surrounded by 6 animals and corresponding coats of arms meant to represent the electors. Each animal attempts to pull feathers off of the eagle. Dismembering the imperial symbol as it stands atop an ermine-lined red hat, a fox, and a hill representing the lands of Austria. The accompanying poem narrates the rush to grab feathers. So, for example, the wolf, bis auf die Ripp ihn gefressen hätt, wenn nicht Blutfreundschaft hinten tät. Which you could roughly translate as well as he would have sort of pulled them apart to the bone if they hadn't been carved from the same stone. How did Pelshofer's reflection on the dangers of empire translate into his patterns of friendship. So what I think is important is this illustrates a point made by Joachim Whaley. Faced with the Ottoman Empire, Central Europeans reflected on what bound the Reich and Habsburg territories together. And this is reflected in the way he socializes with Tyroleans and Carinthians from the Habsburg hereditary lands in Austria, as well as men from the Netherlands, from Franconia, from Saxony, and from Brandenburg, who all appear in his album. His is just one of dozens of examples revealing how friendship, clientage, and patronage crossed religious, linguistic, and political lines in the German house. Albums like this reveal how people from across Central Europe interacted with one another and how the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation and lands temporarily joined to it by the Habsburg monarchy became real to the people experiencing it through their social relationships. So what was German about the German house? Peter Wilson has argued that several often antagonistic versions of Germanness existed in early modern language, culture, humanism, and political thought. Peter Judson has shown how Germanness in the 19th century derived from a person's religious practice, local social position, or degree of education. The implicit and explicit use of the term German was an act of identification with social and legal consequences rather than a real identity category. The German house was a point of convergence for many different types of territories and peoples. Those firmly within the empire, those whose incorporation proved ultimately unsuccessful, and those that never even took part. Though a few individuals preferred, or some of them, quite a few, preferred to sign in Latin, Italian, French, Hungarian, Spanish, Polish, Czech, or even Ottoman Turkish, an overwhelming majority of signatures, and importantly, the socialization that led to them, were in fact in German. There were few contexts in which men from such diverse regions as Mecklenburg in the north, Tyrol in the south, from the Netherlands in the northwest to the mining regions of Upper Hungary in the southeast, would live under one roof and reflect on what bound them together. This might take place at court in Vienna or Prague, during an imperial diet in Regensburg, around a fire in a military encampment, or in the halls of a university. However, politics, language, and competition between economic and military interests tended to encourage historical actors to articulate differences rather than search for commonalities. Perhaps a genuine sense of subjecthood could only be realized beyond the borders of Habsburg territories, where groups presented a united face in a foreign environment. For these men, then, a sort of empire existed at the moment of its enunciation in this German house. Thank you.